Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. We are radical feminists, most of us, the epitome of TERFs. Our analysis of gender identity ideology has been consistent since Janice Raymond's The Transsexual Empire in 1979. So we were not surprised when this new attack on women came along, and we have not changed our analysis at all. In 2018, we wrote a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which lays out our position clearly. It has been signed by over 39,000 individuals from 160 countries and is supported by over 500 organizations. Our declaration states, quote, "Recent changes replacing references to the category of sex, which is biological, with the language of gender, which refers to stereotyped sex roles in United Nations documents, strategies, and actions, and really in governments all over the world, has led to profound confusion, which ultimately risks undermining the protection of women's human rights. We argue that states should maintain the centrality of the category of sex and not so-called gender identity in relation to women's and girls' right to be free from discrimination. We argue that states should ensure that the words woman, girl, and other terms traditionally used to refer to women's body parts on the basis of sex continue to be those used in constitutional acts, legislation, in the provision of services, and in policy documents when referring to persons of the female sex. The meaning of the word woman shall not be changed to include men on the basis of their so-called gender identities. There is much to disagree with in the new US administration. However, the January 20th United States Executive Order defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government is welcomed by WDI. Congratulations to all of us who have been working toward this. You can read all about the executive order on my Substack. We have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. Please join us. You can also become a member of WDI and help our work by volunteering or donating, and you can find us at womensdeclaration.com. We have a packed program today, and I'm very excited about it. We have Alex, who goes by Pinwheel Art, Andreia Nobre, Tonje, and Alison, who are going to be talking about a new book calling for the voices of young lesbians. We have Linda Hart from Finland, and if we have time, we will have news from around the world. So with that, I will turn it over to Alex, also known as Pinwheel Art.
I guess I'll do a little introduction for those of you who don't know me. I've been in this movement for a while, organizing women. I'm also a birth nerd, aspiring traditional midwife, and I was given this lecture to attend on male lactation. So that's what I'll be presenting for you today. My takeaways from that, how they kind of spun it to make it seem like it's actually something that we should support. All right, so inducing lactation with transgender women, a lack of evidence and common sense. The Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine had a lecture. It was titled Making Milk, Sharing Work, Forging Bonds, Inducing Lactation with Transgender Women. And I think we have to take note of this language because I do believe the lecture of this recognizes that this isn't exactly a realistic thing to be promoting. So instead of saying inducing lactation in transgender women or something along those lines, she says with, because obviously the numbers, the data, the percentages are not good. She stated, all should have access to human milk and the opportunity to chest/breastfeed. And I question this. Of course, I think all babies should definitely have access to their mother's milk. But everybody does not need the opportunity to breastfeed, particularly men. She shared a few surveys because there's, like I said, not much data on these things. So she talked a lot about acceptance, and she shared a few online, just like questionnaire kind of things. This is a list of a few of them. Mostly talking about how these individuals feel about their experiences in breastfeeding and inducing lactation and various things like that. There was a lot of talk about allyship and, of course, propaganda with the gender unicorn. She had this amazing straight for equality ally spectrum. So, of course, people who don't want to be allies have this box on their head. We're just in the dark. What's wrong with us? You want to work your way over to this super ally. Let's change some laws. Pretty ridiculous. Plus, on hers, she had some language that was a little confusing, kind of conflating the whole gay with trans thing as people do. I found that interesting. Because that's kind of what's used to push this is LGB, so they're part of that. But we, many of us here know that that's not the case. These are heterosexual men with some very severe mental illness. So ally spectrum, gender fantasies, and I put some of my art in here just to kind of counteract the ick of it all. So some of these images are my art. Because as well as being a birth nerd, I'm also an artist, and I like to create a lot of art, geared towards women, birth, and our power and goddesses and things like that. So one of the first studies, online surveys that she shared had 647 participants. 55% surveyed ID'd as trans women. So you had an exclusively breastfed rate at 6 months of 33.5%. That's 214. And I just had to laugh when she said this because the presenter didn't seem to she didn't acknowledge the fact that over half of the people surveyed were actually men. So of course you're not going to have good breastfeeding rates. She acknowledged that 33.5% is less than we'd like to see. But it's it's so ridiculous. It makes no sense to use a survey like this about breastfeeding in the LGBTQ whatever community, because you're talking about men, and sorry, not sorry, they can't breastfeed, not a thing. Current landscape of care. So there's more of this affirming talk, about how they're misunderstood and affirming terminology you need to use. It's not a Western concept. And of course, she named all the usual suspects, the Hijra, Two Spirits, and all those. She talked about re-traumatizing people depending on what intersectional groups they might be part of. You want to use the pronouns and the names. And then, of course, there's the surgery that people get. And she claimed that there is resistance to inclusivity, affirming care. There was a survey that WPATH did, and they found that physicians do not care enough. They don't care enough about these men lactating. What a shame. Zero-sum thinking. She, used that idea that we can all share our rights. It's not a pie. One does not lose by another's gain. But she also pointed out, independent of actual distribution of resources. And what are we losing when we put funds towards studies of this nonsense, when we destroy women's birthing and breastfeeding groups? We are taking resources, and how they can say these statements and not recognize that is just beyond me. So inclusion of non-gestational parents is lacking, the same as with cis couples, she says. Yes, this is an issue that women and their partners face, but there are so many other ways to include a partner in your child rearing that don't include them, imposing their perversion on that child, which I don't think I'd want that man around my child at all, but we don't need to go there. Right? So chest feeding parent, this was a quote, says it would be too soon if she was never handed another resource that talked about like what mamas need again. So they do want to erase us. The women don't want to be called mamas, but then of course these men want to be called mother and be and say they're breastfeeding. It's so twisted. So that's the current landscape. We're just not caring enough. We're not doing enough. We gotta, you know, accommodate these people's delusions and feelings. A medley of false and true information, dream registry. So what they do is they'll combine things that are true, facts that we know that have been used for women and data and things like that, and kind of mix them with this weird ideology. So there was a chart and it asked a few true false questions. One of them was, or statements, the substance produced by these men is the same as women. She says true, but we don't actually have any definitive data on that. And in my opinion, we also do not need it. There's no point in this. Mothers breastfeed, end of. We don't need to know what they're producing. And if you want to, sure, but it shouldn't be related to breastfeeding. Another one was breast tissue of these men is the exact same as the breast tissue of women. First of all, that's not true. Men do not have the same breast makeup, breast tissue, lobules, ducts. It's not the same. Similar in some ways, but definitely not the same. She says true. I say it's absolutely not the same as a lactating woman's breasts, not visibly. I've breastfed 5 children. And I've seen some of these men's breasts, and they don't look anywhere near the same as a actual breastfeeding, lactating woman's breasts, not visibly physically or on the cellular level. The other claim, a person needs to have given birth to produce breast milk. This is false because women are able to induce lactation and breastfeed, but this pertains to women and not men. I've been in this for a while, and even then it was controversial to, take any kind of drugs and things to induce lactation, because many times women can do it just by pumping, stimulation and then latching the baby. So it is false that you have to give birth, but it does not pertain to men, just like all the rest of this information. She also shared this chart that shows the importance for the man. Of course, she said trans woman. The importance for the man. So what's important to these men is affirming their gender identity, as well as breast maturity. So, getting their breasts a little more full than they are. And then, of course, all the baby stuff, that's not so important. That's down in the 20%. And then importance for baby. Of course, for the baby, you're going to say bonding, health benefits, but we don't know that that's, that this is healthy at all. I would venture to say no. And then affirm gender identity. I'm not exactly sure how that fits in for the baby, but that was the claim. So, so we can see that it's mostly about affirming their gender. It's about them. It's about these men. Obviously, it's not about the babies, and we'll go on and see why. She explains that evidence-based medicine is like a triangle. So you have peer-reviewed research, expert opinion, patient experience. Obviously, we don't have this research for these men, so we're going off of patient experience is far more long-standing than published research. So you're going off of these case studies, what these men say is happening, and not any kind of peer-reviewed research or expert opinions. But of course, the experts are also sharing this nonsense. So what does that really mean? Use of female anatomy and physiology to justify male breastfeeding. So she describes the mammary gland development and of course uses the female breast examples. She talks about how at birth, some babies will excrete a little bit of milk. Sometimes it's called witch's milk from their nipples. And this is due to the hormone levels after birth from the mother and everything like that. But it's not, it doesn't mean that males can also breastfeed. It's just something that happens. And it's female development. She compares the hormones in pregnancy and postpartum to try to, justify all these hormones that are being pumped into them and then stopped, and then more hormones to get them to lactate. So when she compares these, to me, it seemed like they were on the low end of the first trimester. meaning that they would not have the hormones necessary to begin lactating and breastfeed a baby. She talks about varied breast shapes because a variety of breast shapes, some of them have a harder time producing milk. So she uses that, which is also, something women experience. Lactation induction protocol meant for women. So the protocol that they use from Canada is for women. It was for women who were having a hard time producing milk, or sometimes women who have adopted. And even then it was controversial. Some women had experienced mood swings and different things from that protocol. So it's something, it was promoted in the breastfeeding and birth community as a last resort, not something you'd go to just because. These are the case studies that she cited. That's all we have are these case studies. And I believe at least one of them is a man pretending to be a woman, promoting another man pretending to be a woman. And the results just aren't good. So those are the case studies if anyone's interested in actually going in and looking at those. And if you want me to share, like I can, copy paste that to you later if you're interested. But they're pretty easy to find because there's not too many. So these are some of the results from those studies. In my opinion, there was not a lot of data collected. If I was going to do a study like this, I'd probably have a lot of imaging of breast tissue. I would have images and measurements of the milk. I would have data on the baby and its development, and that stuff's not, it's just not there. I think there's 2 studies that talk about some of the nutritional values of their milk, which we'll talk about in the later slides. So you have this first study, they claim 6 weeks, don't state how much was produced. You have 2 weeks, supposedly 4 months, 2 times a day, and 150 milliliters after 5 times pumping in the day. So all of these numbers, if you look at them, they're very, very low. We can compare that to this next slide where it shows how much a breastfeeding baby actually needs. So in per day, a breastfeeding baby needs about 25 ounces or 750 milliliters a day. So you can see that these men, they don't even get close to that. They're not producing anything that could ever sustain life. There was one study that said that they monitored the babies and the growth was fine, but they had to have been getting some kind of supplementation because a baby getting these amounts is not going to survive. This is ounce per feeding. So you can see these numbers and compare and contrast. And then they also claim nutrition is co-identical, but it does not come close to colostrum. I know there was a UK, someone went on the news in the UK and stated that it was the same as colostrum. And I had heard this before as well, but it's nothing like the first milk after birth. And mother's milk is constantly adjusting to meet the baby's needs, developmentally, immunologically, as well as nutritionally. Even in women who induce lactation, they don't get this milk. They do not get the colostrum when they've had their baby and they're not producing and they try to induce lactation, or if they've adopted, they're not getting this first milk. That's produced right after birth. And it's full of antibodies and nutrients that, jumpstart the baby's body for preparing it for life on the outside of the womb. So this is just some of the breakdown, what's in milk, the cells. So they talked a little bit about protein and, other things like that, but there's so much in human female breast milk that is not discussed, just kind of glossed over, just not talked about in any of these lectures or anything I've read about this issue. So you have all kinds of immunological cells, you got B cells and T cells, and all kinds of things that help the baby, protect it from the outside world, help the baby to protect its body as it experiences new things. And this is constantly adjusting. This is constantly changing in mother's milk. So 1 minute, it's the middle of the day and the baby needs lots of fat. And then the next minute it's time to sleep. So you're going to produce more hormones like melatonin and to help that baby sleep. And then if you're sick, you're passing antibodies to that baby. There's nothing about any of this in any of these case studies. There's no data on it. And then just as a visual person, I really felt the need to go and dig in and look at these cells, to look at the lobules and the acini, alveoli, and see what they look like. So as you can see here, this is one of the cells that she showed, the black and white one, pseudolactation and mature lobule and breast tissue obtained from patient B. So this was a patient who was chemically and surgically castrated. And they had also had breast augmentations. And then they did the regime, the protocol for lactation. But to me, when I look at this black and white cell and compare it to the women's breasts on the right, was it on the left for you all? Yeah, the left. Oh, sorry about that. But you can see, so this top cell up here is a mature but inactive. So this top one is what I see here, which makes sense. So you've taken these hormones, you're developing some things, but it's definitely not the same as in early pregnancy or mid-pregnancy or when you're lactating. If you look at that last one on the bottom, the dark purple, that biopsy, that has all these cells in it. It's full. It doesn't have all the connective tissue that you see in the first one and in this black and white photo. So it's not the same. And terminology that they'll use is similar. It's organized similarly. Okay, similar is not the same. Not even a not even a little bit. Like males and females both have nipples. We both might have some milk ducts, but typically those aren't connected to anything in the male, and so on, things like that. So some takeaways, things more important than facts and safeguarding infants is being an ally, affirming one's gender identity, male breasts reaching maturity, and of course their feelings. Things not being considered, the baby's well-being, the mother's well-being, weight loss, protection against certain cancers, bonding, mood, all these things are benefits that the mother gets from breastfeeding her baby. Shared lactation does not protect the mother's supply. If somebody is going to breastfeed, it needs to be the mother. It needs to be one individual, that mother, that woman, because any time that she misses a feed or somebody else takes the baby, gives it some kind of supplement, anything like that, her supply is going to take a hit. It is demand and supply. That baby nursing is what's going to get you your supply. So another thing is how a woman's milk adjusts to meet baby's nutritional and immunological needs. Like I said, it's constantly changing throughout the day, throughout the night, helps baby sleep. And then it helps with baby's developmental factors. Physically breastfeeding forms the jaw and the gut and the lungs and just pretty much everything. It's your development of your baby is finishing on the outside with breastfeeding. Longer duration of breastfeeding equals optimal health and development. And then there's just the fact that this is completely unnecessary. There is no reason other than their own selfish reasons for this to be a thing. It's just completely unnecessary. There are other ways for fathers to bond with their babies. You can hold the baby anytime. You can change the baby. You can bathe the baby. There are so many things a partner, a father can do that don't require him latching an innocent child to his nipple that isn't going to sustain its life in any way, shape, or form. Hug your baby. That's bonding. And also, I also found it very interesting at the end of the lecture that the woman acknowledges that without research on what % of the time this actually works, we as clinicians should be really cautious to be promoting or pushing it. Yet she is here promoting and pushing it. This organization informs physicians, pediatricians, OBGYNs. They're informing all these professionals, knowing that they don't have the data, and I'm sure also knowing that is something we should not even be doing. That's why she says inducing lactation with trans women as opposed to inducing lactation in trans women or something along those lines that imply that they can actually breastfeed and sustain a human life. And then these are some resources. Lucy Leader's Substack is really great. She's taken some of these case studies and broke them down and just written some really wonderful Substacks on this issue if you want to check those out. I really enjoy reading her stuff. And then I've started a group on Facebook, Birth Workers / Mothers Maintaining Women-Centered Language in Maternity Care, because we are taking it back. We're taking back birth, we're taking back our language, and we are going to begin centering mothers and women once again. And then I also included just a YouTube video that I did, the Free Speech for Women or Let Women Speak event when Kelly J came into town. We went to Miami, Florida in front of Dr. Gallagher's office. And I just did this speech on what they're taking away from these girls when they remove their breasts. It's incredibly tragic. I was breastfed by my own mother. I have breastfed my 5 children, and what's being stolen from them is so incredibly important. And I don't think our society really stresses that enough. I don't think a lot of mothers and a lot of women truly understand just how important and how perfect breast milk is for their baby. And that's not a slight at anybody that can't breastfeed. It's just what it is. These are just the facts. This milk that comes from our breasts is perfect for our babies, constantly changing. It is the completion of their development outside the womb. And it doesn't belong to men, not any kind of man. It belongs to us. It belongs to mothers. It belongs to women. And we need to take it back. And we need to be fierce and direct and not play these language games anymore or worry about perverts' feelings. You know, I'm done. I've had enough. And I hope you join me to organize against it if you are a birth worker or mother. And then women birth the people, and we also sustain that life with our breasts. So thank you very much. I appreciate all of you. And that is my presentation. Have a great day.
Next, we will hear from Andreia Nobre. Andreia, I will hand it over to you.
Basically, what's happening is that I am being sued for alleged transphobia. Okay, so I'm going to read down here what I wrote. So I am a Brazilian journalist and writer, and I have talked openly in news articles about women's rights since at least 2009, when I wrote my first opinion pieces on sexual harassment, being a survivor myself of child sexual abuse. In January this year, 2025, I was made aware that I am being sued by a man in Brazil for writing a news article about the lawsuit he was moving against a beauty salon for refusing a waxing service, as they only attended women. So this happened in 2022. This man adopted this name, Kim Flores Carlos. So Kim, like in Kimberly, so it's a feminine name. He booked a waxing session by phone at this beauty salon in Brazil, Milania Institute. On the day of his session at the salon, this man was taken to a room, but after a few minutes, the beautician who was going to serve him, to attend him, she came out and she told the salon owner that the customer was in male briefs and he had an erection. So the service was refused to this man, as the salon only attended women. It's like in the front of the building, you know, we only attend women. This man filmed the whole interaction and he put the video on social media like TikTok and stuff like that, but he didn't get a lot of engagement and stuff like that. So he decided to sue the salon. So in January 2023, I report the case in a news article in English for the Feminist publication for WPub. Shortly after, I published in my Medium account a translation of my own article into Portuguese, because I'm Brazilian, for the Brazilian feminist publication KJ Feminista, which is now extinct, doesn't exist anymore. They shut down. The lawyer defending the salon says that Kim, this man, lost his lawsuit in June 2023. In 2024, Kim started a new lawsuit against the salon for refusing the service. But this time he included me for publishing the Portuguese translation on Medium, and Medium for allowing my article in Portuguese on that platform. Since then, Medium has suspended my account, and the article in Portuguese is no longer available online, as well as my journalist work over the course of a decade. The lawsuit asks for heavy financial reparations due to alleged moral damage for evident act of transphobia, specifically for referring to Kim as a man throughout the article, for imputing false facts and causing embarrassment by quoting the salon owner about the client having an erection. Those are the things that he was saying. So the arrival of the official document was also made in a rather clumsy way, you know. So the proper way of notifying a person that they are being sued is sending them the official document via the justice system. This is the way it's done in Brazil, with a justice officer delivering the letter in person to the respondent of a lawsuit, in this case me. The respondent is the only one who can sign the reception of the notification, as in Brazil, a third party can't sign it for the respondent, not even with a power of attorney document. In case the respondent is not found living at the address the notification was sent to, the lawsuit can proceed. But instead, my family in Brazil was tracked down, nominating my mother's address as my home address, and the notification was sent via the postal service, with the post officer unaware that my family members should be told that this was a notification for me, and that in my absence at the address, nobody had an obligation to sign the reception of the letter on my behalf. So referring to Kim as a man was crucial for the news article I wrote, as the salon only catered for female waxing. They just do female waxing, such as the Brazilian waxing, you know, the full waxing, but not the menzilian, okay? I was recently told that the procedure for women and men are different. A single beautician can perform the waxing on a woman, whereas two people are needed to perform a menzilian. I'm going to try to describe a bit what is needed. So this is for the safety of the male customer, okay? So one beautician presses on the hands, on the customer's body. So it's like, you know, one hand, she's pressing on the body to stretch the skin, right? To reduce the pain and gain effective hair removal. While an assistant proceeds to move away where it's needed, both testicles and penis, right? So the beauty salon in question didn't have beauticians trained in menzilians and risked being sued anyway if they tried, because they might have hurt the customer, right? There's also the question of me embarrassing Kim for writing that he had an erection. But this was simply a quote from the salon owner when I interviewed her for the news piece I wrote. Kim also claims to be poor and implies that I am a person of elevated social status for being a journalist and having published books, when in reality, I am the recipient of child benefit in Belgium and financially dependent on my spouse. So this case can be considered pivotal in Brazil and for Brazilian women, as this is an act of press censorship. Even though my case is not the first and only one of persecution of Brazilian women by trans activists by any measure, the difference is that many women being persecuted at the moment are being sued or attacked for centering women in feminism, or for saying that men can't be women in public, or for posting about it on social media, but not for writing a news piece. In fact, I wrote for 4W Pub about several other cases, including about 3 other journalists. Patricia Ellis, who was threatened with expulsion from the Brazilian Labour Party for criticizing the presence of a man in the We Spa sauna case, you know. Then there was journalist Djamila Ribeiro, who was piled on for an article criticizing the terms people who menstruate, and journalist Madeleine Lasco, who was sued for a reply to a man who claims to be trans. This reply was on X, and she referred to this man, using the word in Portuguese, cara, in her reply. So the translation of the word cara in the context is mate, okay? And as in English, is more often used for men, mate, you know, but it can be used for women as well. But the man who sued Ms. Lasco insists that she referred to him as a man, and she was forced to pay. These are not the only cases, the only women facing hardship due to false accusations of transphobia at the moment. So right now, we have multiple people being persecuted in Brazil, losing their livelihoods, being investigated by the police, or being sued as we speak, most of them women. I'm reminded of Gisela Carvalho, a Black lesbian woman who founded a cultural space for lesbians in Rio de Janeiro, and around 2020 was boycotted after a man who attended her cultural space, he was a man claimed to be trans, and he defamed her as being a transphobe. So Gisela's space, Resiliencia, one of the fewest lesbian spaces in the city, had to close down, and she now struggles to make ends meet. There is also Isabela Cepa, who used to have a feminist bookshop and has been persecuted for years now for criticizing a man on an Instagram post. This man, Felipe Hilton, he's an elected councillor, city councillor. He describes himself as a transvestite, and he was elected as a city councillor for São Paulo. And he bragged on social media that he was the most voted female councillor in the city's history. So Isabella wrote, the most voted female councillor is a man. She faces 25 years in prison, and she had to flee Brazil. And it's becoming worse. Isabela Cepa has shared posts from other people, and these people are now being considered guilty by association, like Karen Mizuno. Her case, a trans activist was criticizing the fact that the skeleton named Lucy is of the female sex, claiming that Lucy could be trans. Karen screenshotted it and wrote on social media, "Human extinction is increasingly ceasing to be a fear and becoming a hope." This post on X is from years ago, but Karen had the police on her door on December 2024. We are even told that people who had their posts shared by Isabela Cepa are being accused of criminal conspiracy or racketeering, the crime of forming a criminal organization. That's the point we are in Brazil right now. There are many, many cases, and if anyone cares to look for the Brazilian leg of Women's Declaration, they have a document talking about several other cases, including Gisela Carvalho, that I mentioned already. Other cases that I mentioned here today. These are the most recent cases that I could remember. So just to finalize here, I had to get a lawyer to defend myself from these accusations. My lawyer said this week to me that she's kind of hopeful, and this is the state that we are. We have Trump in the United States, and she said that she kind of looked into the judge on my case, and she said that he's conservative. So it's, you know, nowadays it's like considered lucky to get a conservative judge, because he might dismiss these accusations and we might not go into trial. So I had to get a lawyer to defend myself, but I won't be making crowdfunding campaigns for myself to defend myself. What I do ask for people, if they can, they would like and are able to support me to pay the lawyer, to be, you know, buy myself published books. You know, some of them, I have 5 of them. So it's the humor series, the Grumpy Guides, the Grumpy Guide to Quit Smoking, the Grumpy Guide to Radical Feminism, the Grumpy Guide to Motherhood. Then we have the report on women's sex-based oppression. And then now we have my newest book that I published last December, which is called Girls Matters and What Matters to Girls. All Amazon, if you can support me, you can do so by buying them, okay? And alternatively, you can ask your local library or bookshop to get my books. So you can buy books or can borrow books from the library, or you can buy from a bookshop close to you. And I will be in the breakout rooms after the webinar if anyone has any other questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so with that, we will turn to Tonje and Alison. I will hand it over to you two.
The project is a book, and it's a project in progress, and it's a book in which young lesbians write in their own words about what it's like to be a lesbian today in the gender identity inclusion era. And the idea behind the project developed because of conversations I had with many young lesbians, especially in Norway, UK, and Germany. As for our working title, we called it Real Stories from Young Lesbians, a record of woke homophobia. And the project has been getting some funding from an institution called Freedom of Speech in Norway, so which is good. It's a collaboration between an organization named Lesbicon and Lesbiconic, and me and Alison. And we are also in contact with others who will contribute with their competence to the project.
This is currently a project that me and Tonje are currently working on. So basically what we're doing is we're looking for young lesbians between the ages of 18 to 35 all across the world to share their stories basically about how they've been impacted by trans activism and how they managed to resist this new form of homophobia. We do already have plenty of stories from a few countries, and I've had a look at them, and I think they are really interesting to look at because it impacts young lesbians in a very similar way to how I've been impacted by it as well. But we are still trying to get some more stories, preferably from countries like Africa and things like that.
We need more stories from all countries, actually. So if you know about young lesbians who have like resisted the gender identity grooming, then please talk about the project and make them contact us.
They can use their real name if they want to, but if they want to also keep anonymous, they can also do that as well. because I understand how difficult it is for young lesbians to speak out. A lot of them are terrified about what's happening, as Tonje has said, that a lot of the young lesbians in her area feel very shy about reaching out and stuff like that, and it can be really scary. So it's just really nice to have young lesbians be able to reach out. Hopefully we will be able to publish the book this year.
We made a template that can be used or not by young lesbians, and most stories are like between 1 and 2 pages. And as Alison mentioned, we don't demand that the contributors use their real name, but I and Alison have to know the contributor's name. And we also have like a deadline for young lesbians to send in their story, and it's the 15th of April. And the book will, first it will be published in English and Norwegian, and then if possible, later in Spanish and German language. So this is actually, I guess all of the country contacts and all of the VDI women know some lesbians, and if you think they would like to participate in the project, please ask them to contact me or Alison.
So if they want to contact us, the email addresses that me and Tonje have given will be the way that they would contact us. And then once we've verified that they're actually a young lesbian, note that this is only for lesbians, not for bisexuals or detrans, because it's really important we have to be specific for it to be lesbians. So once they reach out, we will give them a template, and then they can go and make their story and then send us their story, and then we'll have a look and go about editing it next and putting it all together.
We will move on to Linda Hart, who is coming to us from Finland. Linda.
I'm going to talk about a feminist op-ed, a so-called Sunday essay I published 3 weeks ago in the biggest newspaper in Finland, Helsingin Sanomat, and the reactions that followed. By profession, I'm a researcher in sociology, but let's say everything that I've done relating to gender identity politics and feminism in recent years has been in my free time. And but of course, publishing this essay in such a high-profile newspaper in Finland then also kind of mixed up my free time and my professional roles as well. Here you can see how they even made a mention of the essay in the editorial front page, and then a couple of pages later there was the whole essay of this newspaper. Used to be a broadsheet, like physically a broadsheet. Nowadays it is in tabloid format, but it is very much a broadsheet type of newspaper, which of course has also a wide digital reach. My essay was published on the 19th of January, so that was just one day before Trump's inauguration, which has made the context of discussing gender identity politics and women's sex-based rights in Finland then kind of tricky, as there have been more than one gender-related executive orders coming from Trump's office. I very much tried to make the point in rather bland and neutral language, as it was really for the wider public, that talking about biological sex or two sexes must not be shunned and it must not be stigmatized politically. There is a federation of women's organizations in Finland called the National Council of Women in Finland. In November 2024, they published a call for a strategy against hate speech and hate crimes in Finland, encompassing legal gender, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics as motives for hate speech. As it happens, in Finnish legislation, a couple of years ago, sukupuoli, which means sex and gender, we only have one word for it. Sukupuoli is mentioned as a factor of aggravation in the criminal law nowadays, since a couple of years ago. So you could get a heavier sentence if the crime you commit can be argued as having been aggravated by the person's sex. But the National Council of Women in Finland, which has about more than 70 member organizations, and is unfortunately very captured by trans politics, it wants to see all these other aspects that relate to our sex bodies and existence receive much more political attention and perhaps legislative attention too. As it happens in the Finnish Act on Equality between Women and Men, which is implementation of CEDAW. Since 2015, we have had sukupuoli, which is sex and gender identity, and gender expression, all three of them as prohibited motives for discrimination. So gender identity is enshrined in Finnish law, but it's in the Finnish political context, it's really important to make a distinction between sex and gender identity. And in my piece, I argued that sex matters in areas such as violence, use of force, sport, and reproduction, which we all know. But just to give some context, Finland is one of the few countries in Europe where we have compulsory, mandatory male conscription. So 2/3 of the male age cohort complete military service. For women, it is voluntary. But it really is something that, in the Finnish context, your physical and then your legal sex really affects your course of life. And then if men do not wish to complete military service, they can do a kind of a civilian option, or they might be exempt due to health reasons and so on. But it really affects a person's life course in Finland. And nowadays that we have self-ID for adults, then actually it's your legal sex, legal gender that affects, that dictates whether you are regarded as a legal male and under this mandatory conscription duty. To continue, in the piece, in the Sunday essay, I argued that self-ID is a rather recent political invention. Like I mentioned, in Finland now people over 18 can subjectively change their legal sex, but it is not required by human rights norms binding the Republic of Finland. So for example, the binding interpretation of the European Convention on Human Rights coming from the European Court of Human Rights, it does not stipulate that that member states of the Council of Europe must offer self-ID of legal gender. And minors are not able to resort to self-ID in Finland, but that was very much on the political agenda during the reform of the Legal Gender Recognition Act just a couple of years ago. The Finnish Green Party, Left Alliance, a so-called feminist party, and a women's association, which was formed by suffragettes about 130 years ago. All these four organizations have puberty blockers for gender dysphoric youth in their written political programs. This is something that I also mentioned. As I was really trying to make the point that are these political parties and are these women's organizations and federations of women's organizations really of the view that we are just bundles of sex characteristics that could be altered already in teenage years? As we all know and have heard, scientific evidence for blocking young people's puberty for the reasons of gender dysphoria, scientific evidence for this is very much lacking. This has been reported in the same newspaper. Cass Review has been written about in April 2004. And there were even new systematic reviews on these issues that came out of McMaster University in Canada just a couple of years ago, actually just a few days after I published my essay. In my essay, I wrote about the Supreme Court case of United States versus Skrimetti for the first time in Finnish media. And I wanted to highlight that lots of lesbians, gays, bisexual, feminists, and even maybe we might call them old school transsexuals, oppose pediatric sex trait modification. But all in all, then I really thought that this essay would be rather forcefully ignored by the organizations that I mentioned, as that has happened before. For example, when the Tavistock, or it was there was an article in Helsingin Sanomat in 2023, spring 2023, about Hannah Barnes' book Time to Think and the Tavistock Clinic, and it was the first time Tavistock was really written about in Finnish media. That was very much ignored by all these organizations embroiled in gender identity politics, and also the article on the Cass Review in 2024. But for some reasons, I really hit a spot, let's say. There were, during the following week, there were opinion pieces from some individual people, but there was a joint opinion piece by 3 NGOs opposing me and my text. The 3 NGOs were the National Council of Women in Finland that I mentioned in the essay, the 130-year-old suffragette-based organization, which is nowadays then very much into this intersectional type of feminism. And they had been joined by LGBTIQ Finland, which is the equivalent to Stonewall UK and so on and so forth. These 3 organizations wrote a joint rebuttal. There was also a rebuttal by 2 academics that I've personally known earlier. And then there was one from an academic defending me. She actually mentioned Sex Matters from the UK and the Swedish equivalent for the National Council of Women in Finland, who actually have been against self-ID. But really, what was interesting in all the reactions was that they all focused very much on the rhetoric of diversity and in what in Finnish is called this kind of diversity of gender, and the diversity and multiplicity of both sexes and genders, to be honest. And there wasn't really much to take home from those reactions, because I would have thought that the organizations would have defended something like why they have mentioned puberty blockers for gender dysphoric youth in their political goals. But this was very much lacking. And also in the social media posts that these organizations then published, I don't want to focus too much on the individuals in this debate, but really on the organizations. All the 3 organizations, they published social media posts where they said that, like, I didn't have my facts right and so on and so forth, but no one pointed out any factual errors. I have done my homework. I know what I'm writing about. I've been learning from my international sisters for many years now and following international media on all these different issues. But interestingly, as we have local elections coming up, both municipal and then kind of regional social and healthcare council elections this spring, there was quite a lot of commentary on social media, most notably from candidates from the Green and Left Alliance parties. This was published just a few days after my essay, but we must bear in mind that there was also Trump's inauguration and the first one of these gender-related executive orders that was very much publicized in Finnish media as well. So just a few days after the essay, there was a social media post from the Finnish Green Party on Instagram and Facebook, where they wanted to tell us that the scientific fact of the day is that there are more than 2 sexes or genders. We don't really know what they mean. Oh yes, we do, because they wanted to go in their wider response. They went on and on about how DSDs or so-called intersex conditions then somehow prove the point that like there are actually more than two sexes. But there was a lot of commentary on from a variety of different angles, and I really was quite surprised that the Green Party would go down this route, and many other people were quite surprised, because then the Left Alliance, they very much went for ignoring this debate, which I think was like much wiser from their ranks, even though they share very much the same political ideas and goals as the Green Party in these matters and sex and gender. But let's say for many people in Finland, the word sukupuoli really means sex, as it's also the dictionary level definition for this word. And they can be from all different walks of life and age groups. They can be men and women. They can be of very different political outlooks, but they are very much confused, and some even then annoyed by the fact that then the genderists, if we might call them that for short, want to claim the word sukupuoli and argue that it means gender identity. So what kind of lessons can be learned from this? It's been an interesting 3 weeks, also personally, because I have known many of these people working in these parties or these NGOs or the academics myself. We must bear in mind that there are also people defending this ideology for very personal reasons, and the personal reasons then can be connected to young people and severe psychiatric comorbidities. It really is something quite real. But let's say on a political level, it is of paramount importance that all parties to this debate, both in Finland and elsewhere, are able to argue their case, or the lack of it. Personally, I think scornful commentary was surprisingly easy to bear. After following all of this for so many years and noticing that the argumentation is very much the same all over the world, or I mean all over the Western world who participate on talking about these things on social media, there really was nothing very new. And I kind of understand people who are very confused about my text, that it really might have been new information for them that some feminists, lesbians, and gay people oppose gender identity politics, and that many people think that, for example, many people in both the United States and other countries think that in the US context, state-level bans on pediatric sex trait modification are a good thing. Social media can be apt for responding, but of course one needs to disregard slurs and focus on factual information. So if someone said, for example, in the Facebook comments of one of these organizations that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I've really made it up, then I just give them a few links, including WDI USA and Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender and stuff like that. And when it comes to, I'm very much of the opinion that like it really is helpful that we let everyone speak, we let everyone publish their rebuttals, because then the wider public can see what this is all about. And thinking back to this global context at the moment, I suppose Trump's executive orders will just accelerate what would have happened in due course anyway.
So what's happening in France? Currently in France, the political situation is quite unstable. Nevertheless, we try to schedule meetings with the deputies who will be voting on the proposed law against the transitions of minors, young people. So WDI France wrote to all the deputies in France except of course those from the far right, of course. And we received some answers, and some of them were even very aggressive, and we are going to publish them. Unfortunately, we received a few proposals for meetings, and since the government is currently again facing another motion of no confidence, tomorrow's meeting has been cancelled. So we have received some answers from socialist deputies, and we hope to raise their awareness on the issue, but we are not sure when it will be possible. Last week we also wrote to Rehman Al-Salem, the UN special rapporteur on violence against women, and we have focused our message on 3 key points. First, the need to protect certain words such as woman, sex, lesbian, and girl. Secondly, the necessity of providing special protection for lesbians against the violence of trans activism, and particularly from men claiming to be women, as well as against the practice of transitioning young lesbians, subjecting their bodies to mutilations in an attempt to escape male violence. And third, we also addressed the specific violence directed toward gender criminal feminists and the urgent need to safeguard of freedom of expression, association, and thought. And now we are planning to answer to the CEDAW's call for contributions on the issue of gender stereotypes. And finally, last Sunday, we held a fascinating French language webinar with the renewed Quebec journalist Sophie Durocher about her book, Où sont les femmes? Where are the women? And this webinar will be available online soon. And that's all.
I'll begin with the update that Dr. Suzanne Vierling has been added as a panelist on our Black History Month webinar, how the trans lobby co-opted the struggle for Black American civil rights and how radical feminists of all races can work together to dispel this forced teaming. The webinar will take place tonight at 8 p.m. ET. It's hosted by Black Women's Caucus facilitator Lorraine Nolan, and will also include Kara Dansky, Irene Lawrence, Aja Lyons, and Lauren Levy as panelists. And I'll share the registration link in the chat for those interested in joining us. It's still not too late to register. Last week, President Trump announced the much anticipated executive order titled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation. To give you a quick overview, Section 1 states that it is the policy of the United States that it will not fund, sponsor, promote, assist, or support the so-called transition of a child from one sex to another, and will rigorously enforce all laws that prohibit or limit these destructive and life-altering procedures. Section 3 directs federal agencies to rescind or amend all policies that rely on WPATH guidance, which it labels as junk science, and additionally calls for HHS to publish a review of the existing literature on best practices for promoting the health of children who assert gender dysphoria, ROGD, or other identity-based confusion within 90 days. And in Section 4, the order directs the head of each executive department or agency that provides research or education grants to medical institutions to immediately take appropriate steps to ensure that institutions receiving federal research or educational grants end the chemical and surgical mutilation of children. In response, hospitals and other providers in New York, Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Colorado have reportedly taken action to avoid threaten sanctions and loss of federal funds by suspending these medical treatments for patients under 19. I suspect more will soon follow. Also in direct response to the Protecting Children executive order and in honor of the gender clinic whistleblower for whom it is named, on Wednesday, Senator Josh Hawley introduced the Jamie Reed Protecting Our Kids from Child Abuse Act, legislation that would allow those who were harmed by gender transition procedures as minors to bring lawsuits against the participating individuals and entities. The bill would also prohibit federal funding to any pediatric gender clinic, to any university or hospital that is affiliated with the pediatric gender clinic, and for any gender transition procedures performed on minors. A press release issued by Senator Hawley has more information about the bill, including its full text for those interested. In a Substack post on February 2nd, Carol mentions 2 ways that federal agencies have already taken steps to implement the Protecting Women EO. The first and most far-reaching was a memo circulated on January 29th by the Office of Personnel Management, directing federal department and agency heads to review and eliminate programs, materials, and policies that promote gender ideology within 2 days. The memo also advises that agency heads should report back to OPM on all steps taken to implement the guidance by noon on February 7th. The New York Times covered the implications of the directive in its article titled, "Federal Workers Ordered to Remove Gender Identity from Email Signatures," published on the 31st. The second was a Dear Colleague letter issued by the Department of Education and sent to K-12 schools and institutions of higher education, advising educators and administrators that the department will return to enforcing Title IX protections on the basis of sex in schools and on campuses. And finally, some Virginia residents are calling on the Arlington County School Board and the Arlington County Board to change their policies allowing people to use school and county locker rooms and bathrooms based on their alleged gender identity as opposed to their sex after Richard Kenneth Cox, a man who identifies as a woman and is also a convicted child sex offender, repeatedly accessed a girls' high school locker room and exposed himself to women and children. It appears that the LARPer's foul conduct was condoned by officials because, as Arlington resident and Save Women's sports advocate Mariah Burton Nelson notes in her Substack post on the topic, naked men can enter women's spaces if they say the magic words. Meanwhile, the school superintendent is busy assuring residents that Arlington is adjusting security protocols to prevent incidents like this from occurring again. But what he means by incidents like this is sex offenders' access. We can assume that adjusting security protocols does not include revising school board policy because he adds, Arlington Public Schools will continue to foster an inclusive community for all, including those who identify as members of the LGBTQ+ community, and apparently considers his job done, as Cox has since been criminally charged with regard to the October 21st incident and others. I think there were a total of 22 charges. In her testimony to the county board, Nelson stressed that we need to keep all males, not just registered sex offenders, out of women's spaces. Male nakedness looks like indecent exposure and voyeurism to women and girls, regardless of gender identity, and all of us have a right to privacy, safety, and dignity. That's all I have today. Thank you.